here it is. Bedtime, a sink tale. Right, okay. Night had fallen in Sink Hill, and David was afraid. He was 7 years old, which would really have been old enough to know better, but every night when sent to bed it was the same drama. David would lie there, wide awake, his mind conjuring shapes out of the shadows in the dark corners of his room. He really shouldn't have been watching all those scary movies on Netflix. They didn't seem to bother him much while they were on, playing in a well-lit room with the world outside still bustling away. But when things got still, and the lights went out, they returned to him in unwelcome ways. David would lie in bed and will himself to think about football or superheroes, and instead he would think about a clammy, clawed hand emerging from under the bed and clamping tight over his mouth, silencing his screams as the creature's other hand ran a talon up his belly, his insides spilling out like the stuffing in a teddy bear. Or he'd fixate in the window at the edge of the room, breathlessly waiting for the sound of the window sliding open and a masked murderer slowly slipping through the curtains, blood-stained knife in hand. Or perhaps he'd find his mind casting back to the story he'd heard about the old lady who died in this house before him and Mum moved in, and he'd become certain that if he were to roll onto his back and look up, he'd see her clinging to the ceiling, all dead and rotten, glaring down furiously at him for trespassing in her home. Sometimes sleep would win out in the end, and David would wake the next morning in a bright, sunlit room, and he'd feel silly for ever being scared at all. But other times, his fevered imaginings would work him up into such a state that he couldn't bear to be in that bedroom any longer. He'd leap out of bed and scramble for the door, rushing across the hall to Mum's room. In the past, she'd let him sleep with her and everything would be fine. But he was 7 now, he wasn't a little kid anymore. It really was getting embarrassing. And so now, more often than not, his tired, frustrated mother would send him back to his own room to face alone whatever horrors were plaguing him on this particular night. Now, on this night, it wasn't anything from a scary movie that was making David afraid. It was something he learned in school, as a matter of fact. The teacher had told his class about an old legend from up in the Highlands about a monster called Bonnie Shaw. Bonnie Shaw would come to parents in times of need and give them their heart's desire in exchange for their child. Those poor children would then be taken away forever by Bonnie Shaw to suffer some horrifying fate. The story ended with a laugh, an assurance that there was no such thing as Bonnie Shaw, and even if there was, good boys and girls had no reason to fear. But such rationalisations did little to calm David now. As he lay in bed, his covers pulled up to his chin, he imagined long, spindly arms emerging from the black pool of darkness at the corner of his room, and Bonnie Shaw's leering, hideous face coming into view. He'd slowly crawl up from the bottom of the bed, hands gripping onto David's feet, telling David that it was time to come to him. David would try to explain that there had been some terrible mistake, a mix-up perhaps, and the mum had of course not given him up, but his voice would stick in his throat, and only a terrified, inarticulate moan would escape. The gruesome scenario playing out in David's head was interrupted by a crashing sound outside. David's heart caught in his chest. What was that? Summoning up the courage to step out of his bed, setting a trembling foot on the floor and hoping that clawed hand would not snap him from under the bed to grab it, David slowly walked towards the window in his room. Telling himself there would be no mass murderer waiting on the other end, he drew back the curtain. The view outside from his room looked out onto the street. Immediately he saw what had happened. A van had crashed through his front gate and was now parked in his garden. A blue van. The engine was running, but the doors were open and the driver's seat and passenger's seat were empty. Had there been an accident? Had some careless driver ran into their gate, then scurried away, leaving their vehicle behind? Then David heard a creak, coming from downstairs. His breath caught in his lungs, and he went very quiet, listening for anything else. Nothing. Slowly, David exhaled, allowing the tightening in his chest to subside. The fright of the loud noise and the unusual appearance of the van outside had clearly put him on edge, but surely there was nothing to worry about. Then he heard another creak. This one seemed closer. This time David fell totally silent for even longer, too afraid to let out the slightest breath. His heart was hammering against his ribcage. Someone was inside the house. Those were the 5 words that kept on running through his mind. But then, no, he told himself, it was just the house settling in, like Mum always told him. Houses do that. And there were no more noises after that. But still, he stood there by the window, rooted to the spot, too shaken to go back into bed. He would go across to Mum's room. It wasn't that he was afraid, no. He needed to tell her about the accident outside. She'd want to know about that. Maybe she'd want to call out the police, and all the lights in the house would go back on. David walked across the hall and into Mum's room. Mum? No answer. She must still be asleep. It must be a real deep sleep that the crash outside didn't wake her up. Now that he was here though, David didn't much feel like going back to his room. Maybe he'd just slip into the edge of her bed. He'd take the telling off tomorrow if it meant getting a sound night's sleep tonight. David got into bed, lying on the side facing outwards towards the wardrobe. He pulled up the covers around him, and almost immediately he realised that it wasn't Mum in the bed next to him. He'd lay in bed next to his mother enough times to get a sense of just how her mass filled the mattress and the sound of her breathing. Whoever was lying in the bed now was bigger, heavier, making the mattress sink lower, and the breathing was raspy and ragged. And then there was the smell, a putrid, sweaty odour rising up from under the covers. David could feel the panic rushing up his throat like bile. There was someone in Mum's bed that wasn't Mum. Where then was Mum? And yet nothing had happened. Whatever monster was lying in bed next to him had not yet done anything. They were just lying there, still, breathing. Were they waiting for David to react, to let him know that he knew? Did they want to relish his terror before taking the chance to strike? The thought sprang into David's desperate mind that this stranger just might not kill him, so long as he could pretend he was asleep. And so, fighting back the blind terror with every fibre of his being, David focused on slowing his breathing right down to the steady pace of someone who was sleeping. In. Out. In. Out. After a little while of doing this, the bed started to shake a little. David wasn't sure at first what was causing this, but then he realised what it was. It was like when he got the giggles in class and didn't want the teacher to find out, and he'd cover his mouth, trying to hold it in. But even if he wasn't making any noise, his whole body would shake, his shoulders heaving. That's what this was. The stranger in the bed next to him, they were laughing. David was so intently focused on breathing like a sleeper that he didn't notice it at first. Drip, drip, drip. It was a sound like a tap not quite turned off, but it was coming from somewhere inside the room. Drip, drip, drip. Then David recognised where it was coming from. It was coming from the wardrobe he was lying facing. The drip, drip, drip of something from out of the bottom of the wardrobe, landing on the wooden floor. David barely had time to wonder what was causing that drip, drip, drip when he got to see for himself. The wardrobe door slowly swung open, and there was Mum inside, her body contorted in unnatural angles. Her body must have been resting against the door, and her weight had finally nudged it open. It wasn't all the horrific wounds in the grue that David noticed first. It was her eyes, her wide, bulging eyes, frozen in the terror that had gripped the final moments of her life. Whatever she had seen, whatever had done this, it was now lying next to David, waiting to be seen by him too. She slumped lifeless to the floor, landing in the pool of blood which had started to gather on the floor by the wardrobe. David watched this scene unfold, transfixed in horror. He didn't even notice that his bladder had emptied, urine seeping out into the mattress. The figure in bed next to him kept on laughing. Then David felt a hand on his shoulder. The stranger in bed next to him was trying to turn him around. Helpless, David clenched his eyes tightly shut, going back to the futile gambit of pretending to be asleep. He felt himself being rolled onto his back, was aware of a shape leaning over him, their hot, stinking breath cascading down onto his face. Then he felt grubby fingers in his eyelids, forcing his eyes open. He couldn't pretend anymore. He had to look at this monster, a real monster at last. It was a clown. The sight of him was almost absurd, with his white painted face, rainbow-coloured frizzy hair and bright red nose. But this was no ordinary clown. As David looked at him, eyes widening in terror, he could make out the pitted scars on the clown's cheeks, the dark bloodstains in his clothes. The clown grinned, flashing a mouthful of yellow-brown, broken teeth. David tried to speak. He tried to explain that there had been some terrible mistake, a mix-up perhaps, but his voice stuck in his throat, and only a terrified, inarticulate moan escaped. And so the clown spoke instead. Wakey, wakey. And that's it.